Barbarossa, the invasion that decided World War II. Operation Barbarossa began not as desperation, but as confidence. By mid-1941, Germany stood at the height of its power in Europe. France was defeated, the Low Countries occupied, and Britain isolated. To Hitler and much of the German High Command, the Soviet Union appeared not as a formidable opponent, but as the final obstacle to total dominance on the continent. Intelligence reports underestimated Soviet strength, while ideology dismissed Slavic resistance as inherently weak. Barbarossa was conceived as a short campaign that would destroy the Red Army west of the Dnieper River and end the war in the east before winter. This belief was not irrational in isolation. It was consistent with Germany's experience of rapid victories. But scale changes everything. The invasion was the largest military operation in history, stretching supply lines across thousands of kilometers. It assumed speed would compensate for depth. It assumed collapse instead of endurance. Most dangerously, it assumed that Germany could fight and win a war of annihilation without becoming trapped inside it. Barbarossa was not merely aggressive, it was absolute. And absolute strategies leave no room for correction once they fail. The opening weeks of Barbarossa seemed to confirm every German assumption. Soviet forces were encircled in massive pockets, entire armies collapsed, and millions of prisoners were taken. German columns advanced hundreds of kilometers in weeks, creating an image of unstoppable momentum. Yet speed masked fragility. German logistics were designed for campaigns, not continents. Fuel deliveries lagged behind advancing units. Spare parts failed to arrive. Rail gauges differed, forcing costly conversions. Horses replaced trucks where vehicles broke down. Every kilometer gained increased strain. The Wehrmacht was moving faster than its ability to sustain itself. Soviet losses were catastrophic, but not decisive. The Red Army absorbed destruction and continued fighting, drawing German forces deeper into territory that magnified every weakness. German planners had prepared for battle, not for replacement. They had prepared for victory, not endurance. Each success created distance from supply hubs and reduced flexibility. The faster Germany advanced, the harder retreat would become. Momentum became momentum alone, disconnected from strategic sustainability. This was the paradox of Barbarossa. Every victory increased exposure. What looked like dominance was actually commitment. And commitment, once extended beyond capacity, cannot be withdrawn without cost. German strategy relied on a central assumption that the Soviet Union would collapse politically once its armies were defeated. This assumption proved catastrophically wrong. Despite massive losses, Soviet command structures held. Industry was relocated eastward beyond German reach. New formations were raised with astonishing speed. The Soviet state absorbed trauma and adapted. This resilience shocked German leadership, not because it was impossible, but because it had been dismissed. Ideology distorted intelligence. Soviet resistance was interpreted as disorganization rather than depth. German forces encountered not a single enemy, but layers of resistance. As the front expanded, coordination became increasingly difficult. German units fought continuously without rest, while Soviet forces traded space for time. Every kilometer gained by Germany reduced Soviet territory, but increased German vulnerability. The expected decisive moment never arrived. Instead, the campaign fragmented into countless localized battles, each consuming men and materiel. The war in the East stopped being about annihilation and became about attrition. Germany had not planned for attrition. It had no economic or demographic advantage to sustain it. When collapse failed to occur, Barbarossa ceased to be a path to victory and became a trap defined by its own scale. The true battlefield of Barbarossa was not Moscow or Kiev. It was logistics. German supply systems were inadequate for the distances involved. Roads were poor, railways incompatible, and transport capacity insufficient. As autumn arrived, mud slowed movement to a crawl. Vehicles broke down faster than they could be repaired. Fuel shortages grounded aircraft and immobilized armored units. Soldiers advanced on foot, while equipment lagged behind. None of this was unexpected in theory. It was ignored in planning. German strategy assumed that logistics problems would be temporary because the war itself would be short. When the campaign extended beyond its expected timeline, logistics became decisive. Soviet forces exploited this weakness by retreating strategically, forcing Germany to occupy vast territory without the infrastructure to support it. The deeper Germany went, the less combat power it could concentrate. The front stretched thin. Reserves vanished. Barbarossa revealed a core truth of modern war. Operational brilliance cannot overcome logistical insufficiency. Supply does not support strategy. It defines it. Once logistics fail, strategy collapses regardless of tactical success. By the time this became undeniable, Germany was already committed beyond recovery. Winter did not defeat Germany. Timing did. By the time winter conditions set in, German forces were already exhausted, undersupplied, and overstretched. Cold amplified existing failures. Equipment lacked winterization. Clothing was inadequate. Fuel froze. But these were symptoms, not causes. The failure lay in the assumption that winter would never be encountered. Barbarossa was planned around a calendar, not reality. When the campaign extended into winter, it exposed the consequences of strategic optimism. Soviet forces, by contrast, were better prepared to operate in harsh conditions and received fresh reinforcements. German units, stretched thin, lacked reserves. The offensive stalled. The image of invincibility shattered. Winter marked the end of German initiative, not because of weather alone, but because the strategic window had closed. Once momentum stopped, Germany lacked the capacity to restart it. Barbarossa had consumed resources faster than they could be replaced. Winter revealed what time had already decided. The campaign did not fail suddenly. It failed cumulatively. Winter merely made the cost visible. From this moment on, Germany fought not to win in the East, but to avoid collapse. By early 1942, the consequences of Barbarossa were irreversible. Germany was engaged in a war of attrition against an enemy with superior manpower and growing industrial capacity. The Eastern Front consumed the majority of German forces, limiting options elsewhere. Retreat was politically unacceptable and strategically dangerous. Advance was logistically impossible. Germany was locked into a conflict it could neither conclude nor escape. This is the defining feature of catastrophic strategy: commitment without exit. Barbarossa had eliminated Germany's ability to choose. Every subsequent decision occurred within constraints created in 1941. Resources diverted to the east weakened other fronts. Losses accumulated faster than replacements. The war ceased to be about victory and became about delay. Germany was no longer shaping events. It was responding to them. This transition marked the true turning point of the Second World War. Not Stalingrad, not Normandy. Barbarossa. Once Germany failed to destroy the Soviet Union quickly, the outcome became a matter of time. And time, as Germany had already learned, was not neutral. Barbarossa ensured that Germany would fight a prolonged two-front war, the scenario German strategists had sought to avoid since the First World War. Resources were divided, attention fractured, and flexibility vanished. The Soviet Union absorbed German strength, while the Western Allies prepared for their own campaigns. Germany's enemies coordinated indirectly through shared pressure. Every German division committed east was one unavailable elsewhere. The cumulative effect was strategic paralysis. Germany could no longer concentrate force decisively. It could only react. The war expanded in scope while German capacity contracted. This asymmetry defined the remainder of the conflict. Barbarossa transformed Germany from an aggressor shaping events into a defender managing decline. The illusion of control evaporated, replaced by forced choices and diminishing returns. From this point forward, German strategy focused on preventing collapse rather than achieving victory. This shift was not acknowledged publicly, but it governed every major decision. The war's outcome was no longer uncertain. Only its duration and cost, unbeknownst, remained. Barbarossa did not end the war. It determined how it would end. While Germany bled in the east, its enemies adapted. Soviet industry, relocated beyond the Urals, expanded rapidly. American production accelerated. The industrial balance shifted decisively. Germany could not match this output. Losses on the Eastern Front consumed experienced units and irreplaceable equipment. New formations lacked training. Quality declined as quantity failed to keep pace. The war had become industrial. Germany entered this phase at a disadvantage it could not overcome. Barbarossa accelerated this transition. What had been a campaign war became a production war. Tanks, aircraft, and artillery were no longer tools of victory, but units in a statistical race. Germany's inability to compete industrially meant that each loss mattered more. The Red Army grew stronger as Germany weakened. This reversal was structural, not tactical. No battlefield success could reverse it. Barbarossa ensured that Germany would fight against time, industry, and numbers simultaneously. That combination has no historical precedent for success. Once the war became industrial, Germany's fate was sealed, regardless of individual operations or commanders. As the war dragged on, strategic exhaustion set in. German leadership faced mounting pressure from all directions. Decisions became reactive. Initiatives sought to regain momentum rather than change fundamentals. Resources were stretched thin. Internal dissent increased, but was suppressed. The regime doubled down on control as control slipped away. Barbarossa had consumed Germany's margin for error. There was no longer room for experimentation or recalibration. Every choice carried immediate cost. This exhaustion was not merely material. It was cognitive. Leaders clung to familiar frameworks, even as circumstances changed. The war demanded adaptation at a scale Germany could not manage. Strategic exhaustion is often invisible in the moment. It manifests as rigidity, repetition, and denial. Germany continued to fight with determination, but determination cannot substitute for capacity. By the time exhaustion became undeniable, options had vanished. Barbarossa had transformed Germany's strategic environment permanently. The war was no longer something to be won. It was something to be endured until it could no longer be endured. Later, German decisions cannot be understood without Barbarossa. Every choice after 1941 was constrained by its consequences. Attempts to regain initiative, from renewed offensives to technological gambles, occurred within shrinking limits. Resources diverted to wonder weapons could not compensate for structural inferiority. Tactical successes failed to alter strategic decline. Barbarossa had removed Germany's ability to set the terms of the war. Leaders acted rationally within irrational constraints. This distinction matters. Failure did not stem from ignorance alone, but from commitment beyond capacity. Once committed, Germany could not disengage without catastrophic loss. This is the essence of strategic overreach. Barbarossa exemplifies how decisions made under confidence can create conditions where later realism becomes irrelevant. By the time German leadership fully understood the implications of the Eastern War, understanding no longer granted agency. Choices existed only in theory. In practice, the war followed a trajectory set in motion in 1941. Barbarossa was not a mistake that could be corrected. It was a decision that defined the remainder of the conflict. By the later years of the war, the outcome was determined, though not yet visible. Germany continued fighting, but victory was no longer a realistic objective. Losses mounted, territory receded, allies fell away. Barbarossa had ensured that Germany faced enemies whose combined resources dwarfed its own. The war's continuation became a matter of inertia rather than strategy. This phase of war is often misunderstood. It is not marked by sudden collapse, but by gradual inevitability. Battles still occurred. Decisions were still made. But none altered the strategic balance. The war had entered its final logic. Barbarossa's legacy was not defeat in a single battle, but the removal of alternatives. Germany had crossed a threshold from which return was impossible. The war's end was delayed, but not avoided. This distinction is critical. Understanding when wars are decided is more important than understanding when they end. Barbarossa decided the war years before it concluded. Everything that followed was consequence. By the later years of the war, the outcome was determined, though not yet visible. Germany continued fighting, but victory was no longer a realistic objective. Losses mounted, territory receded, allies fell away. Barbarossa had ensured that Germany faced enemies whose combined resources dwarfed its own. The war's continuation became a matter of inertia rather than strategy. This phase of war is often misunderstood. It is not marked by sudden collapse, but by gradual inevitability. Battles still occurred. Decisions were still made. But none altered the strategic balance. The war had entered its final logic. Barbarossa's legacy was not defeat in a single battle, but the removal of alternatives. Germany had crossed a threshold from which return was impossible. The war's end was delayed, but not avoided. This distinction is critical. Understanding when wars are decided is more important than understanding when they end. Barbarossa decided the war years before it concluded. Everything that followed was consequence.